are Seraphim.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Generation Space podcast. In today's episode, we're diving into the Davos 2025 theme of Rebuilding Trust, which focuses on restoring confidence in global systems and emphasizing collaboration and accountability between industry and governments. This theme ties perfectly with space technologies, particularly in regard to connectivity, satellite communications, data sharing, climate, and sustainability agendas. And joining me today to discuss our two pioneers in space tech, we have Parth Trivedi, CEO of Skylo Technologies, which is revolutionizing satellite communications directly to cell phones. And we have Andre Ronser, a partner at Seraphim, the global leader in space tech investment, and he is an expert in his field. Hi, Parth. Hi, Andre. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Leah.
Hi, Leah.
Let's get to it. Parth, we'll start with you. We've had you on the podcast before, but just in case anyone has missed it, for our listeners who are not familiar with Skylo, can you tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. And thanks to you and Seraphim for inviting me to be here. Skylo is a global direct-to-device service operator that connects cellular devices directly over satellite so that our subscribers never lose coverage. Our network essentially presents a standard cellular signal to ordinary smartphones, IoT devices, and other cellular devices, bouncing signals off of existing satellites that our radio access network technology is integrated into using the latest cellular standards. And we're super excited now to share that our service is live across 5 continents, across more than 35 markets and counting, with millions of activated devices.
Thank you, Parth, and congratulations. That's super exciting times. And as you've just told everyone, you're focused on direct-to-cell technology, and as I mentioned in my intro. So with the theme in mind, how do you think satellite communication, especially direct-to-cell, in your opinion, can help with the goal in today's world?
Absolutely, Leah. I think first and foremost, connectivity itself is such a equalizer in today's democracies when we talk about access to information. And it is a very empowering capability, especially when you're able to extremely economically provide connectivity where it was not available before. But in addition to that, providing connectivity not just in those moments when you need it the most, let's say in emergencies, but also in moments where you didn't expect to have it, but you really needed it, whether it's associated with education, whether it's associated with health, whether it's associated with enterprises who are looking to transform the way their industries run with data. I think now being able to take connectivity for granted, especially in a world of AI that we live in, is so critically important for bridging that next digital divide, not just connecting the unconnected and the underconnected, but really using it as a mechanism to transform industries and the way ordinary consumers go about their lives. That's what I'm most excited about when it comes to direct-to-device.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's super important kind of reaching those underserved areas, reaching people who previously, I think there's a stat that is it still 50% of the world?
Yeah, we actually see even in geographies that are perceived to be well connected, we find that up to 40% of the landmass, including in North America, simply doesn't have coverage. It's expensive to lay out fiber and to lay out cell phone towers to connect these geographies. But it's not just the macro holes in coverage, such as the national parks or the deserts or the other areas that you would expect to not have connectivity in. But frankly, it's also the micro holes in coverage, the suburban areas, those areas where you actually do expect to have connectivity, but often due to the way we architect terrestrial networks, it's not always possible to hit every single square meter. As an example, I live in Palo Alto in California, where from my house to 300 yards away from my house, I have no signal. And I have to drive well outside of my neighborhood before I'm even able to text or call people. And that's an example of, hey, I should now be able to expect to have a consistent mode of connectivity anywhere I go. And frankly, as a consumer, I should not have to worry about what format this connectivity is taking, whether it's Wi-Fi when I'm in the house, whether it's cellular when I'm outside the house, or whether it's satellite well away from my neighborhood. That's the role that's a responsibility that we have in the industry, is to not connect things over satellite, but rather collide the cellular ecosystem with the satellite ecosystem.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thanks, Parth. And yeah, that just really makes it clear that obviously if we're not receiving it in urban areas, how bad it must be in kind of underpopulated areas and, also marginalized populations where they require increased access to education, healthcare, all sorts of things like that. So it's really seriously important what you're doing at the moment. Andre, bring you into the chat now. As a partner at Seraphim, you have a broader experience of the satellite and space industry. How do you see investments in satellite technology and the growth of the industry helping to rebuild trust between governments and private companies? How is that coming together and what are you seeing?
Well, thanks, Leo. I think that's a great question. And I want to echo a few things that Parth and you have just said. I think fundamentally humans are about communication and storytelling, and that drives the world forward. It always has been. And whether it's in the right direction or not, that's a separate question. So, when do SATCOMs come into play here? I don't think it's about the content here, right? It's about enabling participation. And for me, that's a basic human necessity, possibly even a basic human right. And so SATCOMs, as Parth pointed out, as you have just pointed out, you can connect those that are unconnected, you can fill in the gaps. So you let people participate, and therefore you empower them, and therefore you build trust. But going back to your question, I think it was directed towards governments and businesses. And I was thinking about it a while before we started the podcast today. And in today's world, you can measure and observe nearly everything. So in theory, you could get a ground truth. And there's a whole separate discussion around how the ground truth thing gets manipulated. But again, that's, I think, for a very different podcast. So going back to SATCOMs, I think the role here is to connect all those sensors and all those peoples globally to observe that ground truth and enable them to get it in real time to the decision makers. Parth and I had lunch yesterday, and he was talking about the LA fires. And so disasters are a great example, where you need ground truth, you need it in real time, so you can make better decisions and you're empowering people. Weather warnings are another thing, but also quite mundane things like infrastructure monitoring or traffic management. The moment you can easily and seamlessly connect with the ground truth through people or sensors, I think that's the opportunity here to build trust across governments, across corporations, and the wider population.
Brilliant. Well put. Yeah, thank you. Hugely important. And we'll touch on kind of the disaster relief aspect of it a bit later on. But Parth, I'd just like you to delve a little bit deeper into your experience from a commercial perspective, working with governments and rule makers. So when it comes to setting rules and standards and regulations around nascent technologies like AI and your own technology direct device, can you tell us a little bit about what's changed in recent months?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question because as technology leaders, we often spend a lot of time talking about interoperability. Standards are hugely important for the cellular industry when we talk about 3GPP and the work that we're doing for the end-to-end standards to ensure that every single layer of the connectivity stack has context on this new mode of connectivity, and it's optimized for every interaction that you might have over satellite. But beyond that, when we think about expanding this network in an extremely predictable and reliable way, interoperability with governments is super important. And what I've seen is over the past few months, I've seen a lot of collaboration from policymakers, from governments who are reaching out and they're trying to understand this new paradigm around direct to device. They're trying to get ahead of what the implications of this will be in a very positive way, such that they can accelerate the rollout of these services in their individual countries. So, as an example, over the past 6 months, I was just recollecting yesterday with Andre that Skylo has probably participated in more rulemaking and policy inquiries than we have in the last 6 years. And it goes to show that policymakers are reaching out to industry. Industry is providing extremely good input, and the collaboration there is extremely strong. Having now traveled around the world in various countries and continents, explaining to regulators, and frankly, most of whom are not just familiar with the work that we're doing, but are keeping up with the pace with which the industry and the technology is evolving. So I was really excited to see that, frankly.
Yeah, that's fascinating and hugely important. So you're seeing governments and rule makers connecting with commercial industry, but also with each other. I think it's always been happening, but now due to economic times and geopolitical tensions, it's become more and more important. So that is fantastic to see, and hopefully we see that continue. Parth, we'll go. Andre touched on it. Maybe you've got some direct experiences that you can share, but we mentioned the fires in LA, for example, and with the world facing more and more crises and challenges, how can your technology director sell, and also maybe Andre can go and talk a little bit, but my generalist satellite technology, but how can it help governments and organizations and general first responders quickly respond to emergencies and natural disasters and other health crises?
Absolutely, Leanne. If you don't mind, I'm going to stray away for a brief moment away from the emergency use case, because that's the one that most often comes up when you think about satellite connectivity. But I was thinking about a couple of examples from my own personal experience, which are extremely powerful when it comes to some of UN development goals. One of them is, in fact, World Bank had invited me on a tour in India. And this is to do with microtransactions and lending in rural communities. And they had actually set up these women empowerment groups where the women of a village become empowered to essentially become self-help groups and manage and run essentially their own mini financial institution, lending to their community members and doing so in a way where traditional financial institutions have failed. They're able to do this because of the mobile phone. They're able to do this because now they have, everyone has a phone. You're able to run mobile payments. Everyone has a bank account digitally. And so you're able to transact in a way because of connectivity, because of the fact that technology is in everyone's hands, in a way that you could never do before. As I was going from village to village here with the World Bank, it struck me that many times what's failing these communities is just the presence of connectivity in a reliable and predictable way. So that came out as this is a very powerful use case where you can have an economic level playing field with work that's already being done and a use case that's already proven out on cellular, but now extending that with maybe digital transactions over satellite. The second use case that really stood out to me in the past few months was, we were running a hackathon at MIT. And we encouraged students to take our tech. We gave them developer kits. And we encouraged them to think about IoT applications, so industrial applications for whether it's using sensors or whether it's using end effectors or others, but having a satellite connectivity component in it. These students over a weekend built an array of sensors that could be deployed in forests with an AI-enabled inference engine running at the edge with microphones in these arrays that were able to record and pick up bird sounds, identify the specific species of birds, and share that information over our network in real time. So it was very powerful because it's now enabling you to understand bird migratory patterns, understanding how these forest ecosystems are evolving with different species. So the ability for even students to come up with incredible capabilities that can transform the way we measure and monitor our ecosystems and use, again, satellite connectivity as an enabler in making that happen, to me was a very powerful example of the art of the possible with direct to device. And now you can do that with not a $500 satellite connectivity kit, right? You can do it with a $5 cellular module. That is the real unlock.
Well, I love that. That's two completely unique examples that, I would never have even thought of, and I'm sure our audience wouldn't have either. So thank you for highlighting those. I absolutely love that. Andre, if you don't mind, it'd be great if you could just share a little bit of your wider view from an Earth observation perspective. How can these technologies support countries in tackling things that we've discussed, like climate change and global security?
Yeah, well, as a space investor, we do love SATCOMs, and the other big group of satellites are obviously geospatial Earth observation satellites. So we're investing quite a few of them. And again, going back to one of our earlier points around seeking the ground truth, I think that's crucial in building trust, right? And so you need to have a common and correct understanding of what it is. And Earth observation has a unique capability in doing so for many domains. And so thinking back, it has been mostly or exclusively, governments who have funded these satellites and constellations and had access to the data. And first and foremost, the defense arms, the militaries, and the three-letter agencies. But looking back at the last decade or a bit more, capabilities have become cheaper because launch has become cheaper. The satellites themselves have become cheaper. And the quality of the sensors has improved massively. And so that means way broader access to that information. And, there are a lot of these companies that have gone public now, Planet Labs, Spire, and others. And you mentioned weather monitoring. It's a really good example. And if I'm not mistaken, if you look at the globe, you'll see that weather radars, which is kind of the most important input to a lot of weather models, you have them in all of North America, you have them in all of Europe. And I think then you have some on the coastal regions in Australia, but the map is basically blank. Whole continents are blank. Latin America, Africa, vast parts of Asia. Now, what you can do with these capabilities today is you can create a virtual Met Office using satellite data. And we have a company in the portfolio that serves as virtual Met Office to countries including the Philippines and Kenya. And, you start leveling playing field and you start empowering the people because they're no longer dependent on other nation states in terms of getting access if that data is even in existence. And I think that's really, really powerful. The other thing I was thinking about is global security. And again, it's quite a topic in 2025. And so really understanding what is happening in conflict zones and understanding the ground truth again levels the playing field. You cut out the middleman, right? You know what is actually going on and you can react to it in an appropriate way without having to trust someone who can or who might manipulate you. And I think the world in that way has come a long way.
Yeah, that's super interesting about the hyper local weather. Thank you, Andre, and thank you, Parth. Thanks for joining me on that. I'm sure there's so much, involved in this that we could talk about. Yeah, we could go on all day, but I think that's it from me. If there's anything else you want to add, please do.
I think, Leah, thank you so much. Just to build on one of the last points that Andre and yourself made, we were humbled by the way that our network was called into action during the events in Florida or the events in Southern California with the wildfires. But to end on a positive note, how amazing it would be if we were able to advance the way we measure our environment, and we can perhaps find a way to know about these incidents well in advance, or perhaps even prevent them with the use of ground truth and sensors and connectivity, which I think is going to be a collective and collaborative effort from everyone involved. We're excited to play our small part in it.
Hugely important. Yeah, thanks for adding that in, Parth. And thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Andre.
Thank you both.
3, 2, 1. We are Seraphim.